Welcome to the webinar, everyone. My name is Catherine Baird. I'm Executive Director of Export New Zealand and Director of Advocacy at Business New Zealand. And it's fantastic to be here with the MFAT officials to talk about this fantastic FTA. So I'm just going to run through the housekeeping sort of bits and pieces so you know what's coming down the pipeline. And, you know, the great thing about the whole digital webinar, I guess, offering is that we can include exporters and business people from all over New Zealand. So thanks for joining. The online format of the webinar will be a presentation by Greg with an overview of the FTA goods outcomes, followed by Q&A. We have got subject leads online to answer your questions. So we have experts on the goods market, access, wine and spirits, customs procedures, rules of origin, environment, and also the required changes to New Zealand legislation with regard to tariffs or quotas. You won't be able to turn your video on or unmute yourself. We're totally in control. But we would encourage you to engage via the Q&A function. So we will try to get through the questions if time's permitting. Please select all panelists when you send your question to ensure it's seen both by the panelists and the host. This session is being recorded and may be uploaded to the MFAT website for those who could not make it online today. Right, so I will just very quickly say that, look, I think this is one of the best FTAs that New Zealand has ever achieved. It's been a fantastic result. I know our officials worked really hard on it, and I think there was a lot of working through the night because I do understand a lot of this was negotiated, via this kind of technology. So, you know, that's not always the easiest of environments, but I think the planet's definitely aligned for New Zealand to get a good quality outcome here. And I would say if you look what's happening in politics in the UK at the moment, maybe timing is everything. And we squeezed this in just before they're having a political dramas over there. Right, so that's all I'm going to say. We're going to hand over to the experts. So I'm just going to introduce Greg. So Greg Andrews is the manager of the Trade Policy Engagement and Implementation Division in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. His division is responsible for managing MFAT's program of stakeholder treaty partner engagement on trade and for the ongoing implementation and periodic upgrade of New Zealand's enforced trade agreements to ensure they remain cutting edge in their delivery of market access to New Zealand exporters and in their contribution to key regional trade architecture and bilateral relationships. It's a lot of official MFAT speak. So anyway, I'm going to hand over to Greg now. He's also New Zealand's CPTPP senior official, another great agreement. Thank you.
Ngā mihi, Catherine. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I can see there's a lot of you out there. We really appreciate your time and really pleased to get together today to be able to give you a little bit more detail about the goods outcomes of the FTA and to all of your questions. It's been, as Catherine mentioned, it's been a great achievement for New Zealand to get the FTA so quickly. It was a priority for us to land this with the UK ever since Brexit. Negotiations were launched just in June 2020, so a really outstanding achievement that less than 2 years later we had the deal. I know you've all signed up today to hear and to ask questions about the UK FTA. But I also want to acknowledge the other outstanding recent achievement, which is the EU FTA, the FTA between New Zealand and the European Union. That is another great result for New Zealand, unlocking an enormous lucrative market for us, $100 million tariff reductions from day one of the FTA. We're not going to go into any detail well, the intention is not to go into any detail on the EU FTA today. But if you do have questions on it, we'll obviously do our very best to answer them today for you, or we can come back to you later on. But we really want to focus today on the UK FTA. We've already done some of the general outreach and the general explanation of what's in the agreement with the UK. So now what this really is an opportunity for is to hear from the experts to give you the opportunity to ask your questions as detailed as you like about the goods outcomes, about what it means for you and for your products, and really to start moving into that implementation phase so that we can ensure that New Zealand gets the best from the agreement as soon as it enters into force. So, I mean, just to note that, as Catherine mentions, it's really great to be able to do this session through this format. We're pretty familiar with it from the negotiations. Given COVID-19, almost all of the negotiations were done virtually as well. Lots of late night and early morning video conferences with the UK, and I think that really just is another sign of what an amazing outcome it was to achieve that through that virtual means. So what I'm going to do is run through pretty quickly and quite a high level some of the outcomes. We're assuming that you have seen all of the material or been to the more general presentation on the outcomes. Just want to set the scene a little bit, and then we're going to hand over to you guys to ask your questions, all of the experts that are sitting here with us. So starting at the top level broadly on the market access outcomes, just to remind you some of the high level outcomes. So the FTA with the UK is going to eliminate customs duties on entry into force of the FTA for 97% of tariff lines. That's including wine, honey, onions, kiwi fruit, and many dairy products. The UK will eliminate customs duties over 3 or 7 years on a further 2% of tariff lines, and that includes some seafood and dairy products and cherries. And the remaining 1% of UK tariff lines will be liberalised over a longer time frame of up to 15 years, but with immediate tariff-free access under quota arrangements during that period. The quotas exceed current trade volumes and will grow over time. Products covered by those quotas are fresh apples, butter and cheese, beef and sheep meat. I hope you all know about the tariff finder that's on our website. If you don't, you should Google it and have a look. It's really great. You can just drop your product in, describe it, or if you know the HS code, put that in there, and it will tell you what the FTA outcome is for your product. You can also do it for the other markets that we have FTAs in. Now moving on to some of the kind of more specific outcomes in particular sectors. There is, given the importance of our wine trade with the UK, of approximately $500 million, there is a wine and distilled spirits annex, which provides for comprehensive recognition for a list of New Zealand winemaking practices, as well as minimising administrative burdens and costs from certification and labelling requirements. And we have Rose here who can answer questions about that. The FTA also includes a broad set of really great outcomes for Māori, including in regard to trade and goods. So given the significant concentration of Māori assets in the primary sector, obviously the agriculture outcomes in the FTA are really beneficial, and that's something that came through very strongly in our engagement with Māori through the FTA and through the independent studies that were conducted as we were negotiating. And at full implementation of the FTA, all tariffs on New Zealand exports to the UK will be eliminated. So that's in the range of products of interest to Māori, including honey, kiwi fruit, apples, fish and seafood. And also important to mention the dedicated Māori Trade and Economic Cooperation chapter. The first time we had a chapter like that, it's great to be able to replicate that in the EU FTA. It's a really important part of the FTA and a very important mechanism for the implementation of it. It recognises the value of increased Māori participation in international trade and investment, and promotes and creates a mechanism for cooperation between New Zealand and the UK to enable and advance Māori economic well-being aspirations. Now on rules of origin, the FTA has been designed to be simple, transparent and trade facilitating, so that will enable manufacturers to use materials from regional and global supply chains in their production processes, and traders will be able to use self-declaration to establish origin. On customs procedures and trade facilitation, the focus in the chapter is on ensuring efficient clearance for traders and the use of electronic systems. including paperless trading and the establishment of a single window system for submitting the necessary customs documentation electronically. It also stipulates quick release times, including for expedited shipments for perishable products. So that should normally be cleared by customs authorities within 6 hours of arrival. Provision is also made for traders to be able to apply for advanced rulings on questions of origin and classification, which should be provided within 90 days. And we've got Jamie here to answer questions on that. And finally, on the environment chapter, includes commitments that prohibit subsidies to increase fishing capacity and to take steps to eliminate harmful fossil fuel subsidies. The chapter also acknowledges the important role that sustainable Māori environmental approaches can play in such areas as fisheries, forestry and agriculture. And the chapter also prioritises the elimination of tariffs on 293 environmentally beneficial products, the largest such list in an FTA to date. And we've got Robert here to answer questions on that. So what I'm going to do now is just actually highlight a couple of sectors, just to I guess to give really concrete examples of the outcomes in the FTA and to show the range and breadth of outcomes. The first on fashion items. So the UK's tariffs on clothing, footwear, textiles, jewellery and leather items, which currently range from 2 to 14%, will be removed on entry into force of the FTA. And that, of course, requires the goods as originating in New Zealand under the FTA rules to be eligible for tariff elimination. In terms of olive oil exporters are also going to benefit from the FTA. Currently, olive oil faces a tariff of between 102 and 112 pounds per 100 kilograms, and that's going to drop to 0 on entry into force of the FTA. Producers will be able to bottle their product outside of New Zealand and still meet the rules of origin requirements, provided the product doesn't enter free circulation outside before being exported to the UK. So that means the UK has great potential for us to be a market for growth for olive oil, despite the distance to the market. And finally, as you can see from that slide, what happens now, next steps, you can see we're really focused on those last few phases of getting the FTA into force. Both New Zealand and the UK need to ratify the FTA through our respective parliamentary processes before the agreement can come into force. And New Zealand is working hard and as fast as we can to complete all the necessary steps and that by the end of the year. But I think it's important to note that given we're talking about parliamentary processes here which don't have set timeframes, we can't confirm right now a ratification date. But as soon as everything falls into place, and we're working hard with the UK on this, we want to make sure that we give you the information about when entry into force will be so that you're ready to take advantage of the great outcomes of the FTA. So thanks very much, Catherine. Thanks, everyone. That's a quick overview. And now back to you, Catherine. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm on mute. We're now into the Q&A, so don't forget to put your questions into the chat box. And I'm sure we've got a great team here with a wide lot of knowledge who can help. So I've got a few questions to just get the ball rolling. And so we'll start with that, and then we'll also keep an eye on the questions coming through. So this one's for Greg. When is entry into force? Will a change in leadership in the UK cause delay or re-litigation of the FTA? Great question.
Well, on the second part of the question, Catherine, I guess I can't really speak that or say anything about the UK politics. I don't know if we have anyone from the UK High Commission joined us here, but certainly for our part on New Zealand side, we are working really hard and as fast as we can to prepare for entry into force. The UK New Zealand UK FTA implementation bill has been introduced into Parliament. The first reading will be soon, we hope. So that's I think we're making good steps. We're also obviously in very close touch with our counterparts in the UK on their processes. I believe their implementation bill has been introduced into the House in London as well. I believe they've had their first reading. They do have different ratification processes than us, though. We'll have to see how they go with their processes. Thanks. But certainly on our side, aiming for having everything done before the end of the year.
Great. Yes, I think we need to keep the momentum because it's a really seems like a bit of a changing world out there with all the geopolitics that's going on at the moment. So really want to get this one locked and loaded. Right, okay. In determining origin, this is for Jamie, how much value can be attributed to design, e.g. NZ, compared to physical assembly, which may be outside of New Zealand?
Thanks for the question. There are no set caps as to the amount of an RVC component that can be attributed to different parts. What the FTA does specify is that a trader should use the generally accepted accounting principles of the country that they are in, and also that the value of a good reflect that it be reasonably contributed to the good. So the profit component that you can put into the profit or IP component that you put into the value of your good should be a reasonable estimate of the contribution as applied across all of the goods.
Great, thank you. Okay, next one is for Jamie. In determining origin, we've done that one. Can we ship product to the UK prior to the FTA coming into effect, put the product into bond and customs, clear the goods once the FTA is finalised, and then benefit from the duty reduction?
Yes. Short answer is yes. The FTA specifically provides for goods that are either on the water or have not been formally entered into the importing party to then enter after the FTA comes into force and still be able to access the preference. The one limitation is there is a 180-day window to do that. After that, the window closes.
Great, thank you. Next one for Greg. Are there any implications from the NZ-EU FTA relevant to the UK FTA?
Actually, can I pass that one straight to David? David, I don't know whether you've got a goods answer for that question.
Sure. No, essentially they're separate outcomes. So the UK FTA outcomes apply irrespective of those into other markets. So traders have free choice to export to the UK at the UK FTA rate, or to other markets using our free trade agreements with other countries, or at WTO rates. So free choice.
Great, thank you for that. Next one's for Rose. The UK alcohol duty system is likely to change to a standard method of taxation and to be taxed in proportion to the ABV. Was this known when concluding the FTA?
So again, I could do a short answer of yes, but so yes, the UK's proposed new alcohol duty system has been put out for consultation in the UK in around October last year, I believe, during which time we were in the final stages of negotiating the wine and distilled spirits annex with the UK. These are considered, I guess, a part of an ongoing domestic policy process, and they didn't fall in scope of the discussions that we had with the UK. And our understanding of those changes, if they were to come into force, is that they would apply equally across all producers, both in the UK, in New Zealand, and in other countries as well. So while the annex doesn't address that directly, what the annex does do is provide certainty around the conditions for labelling, certification, and winemaking practices that can be used in the UK, which will hopefully give the opportunity to increase export returns and provide further flexibility into different markets. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm sure that for any of you in specific sectors, if you want to go for a deeper dive on any of this, I'm sure all these officials are more than happy to engage with you directly outside of the webinar. So don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, next one is for Jamie. Why are the New Zealand government collectively joining with other governments to put new rules in place to control why? It says why are, but maybe it means why not. Why are the New Zealand government possibly not collectively joining with other governments to put new rules in place to control shipping line coercion? Oh, that's politically loaded. Who do we give that to, Jamie?
I'd like to say pass. The rules of origin doesn't have specific provisions in it to dictate what means of transport a producer can or cannot use or should not use. We leave those decisions open to the individual trader to determine what is most appropriate to their specific business model and needs.
Yeah, great, thank you. And look, maybe I could just add to that in that, we all know it's been incredibly tough with the logistics and the supply chain, and all those cost pressures have gone up. And look, it's really particularly hit small to medium exporters. I think the bigger exporters have been quite well looked after by collectivising through things like kotahi. But I do understand some of those charges are starting to come off. It's probably, we're probably looking at another 12 months of pretty hard going with high logistics costs, but the world will right itself, and some of those charges are definitely starting to come off. And we get a regular report from the Port of Auckland as to how they're going, and there's a lot more green lights than red lights in the way that they measure themselves. So maybe some green shoots there. Can I just remind people to use the Q&A? So the next question we've got is for David. When is year one for goods traded under quota?
Oh, thanks for that. So year one is the day the FTA enters into force. And so the volumes for quota access for year one will be proportional to how much time remains in the year. So if we enter into force 3/4 of the way through the year, we will have 1/4 of the quota volumes available for year one. Or if the FTA enters into force early on in the year, then nearly all of those volumes for each of the quotas will be available. And then year two starts on the 1st of January, and each year subsequent to that is the 1st of January is the next quota volume increase or tariff cut. And so the first year for quotas will be a proportion of the published volumes, depending on when the FTA enters into force.
Great, and you've got a follow on from that, which decides to get access to the quota.
Pardon me?
Who decides who gets access to the quota?
Oh, okay. So the quotas are administered by New Zealand. That means that New Zealand issues export certificates to traders that seek access to the UK, and there are no further restrictions or requirements once on the UK end. And the export certificates are issued in the normal way as for other quota markets. So for meat, they're issued by the Meat Board. For dairy, they're issued according to the Dairy Industry Restructuring Act, and for which is on a basis of milk solids collected. And then for apples, it'll be administered by the Apples Authority. And so that apple quota, I should say, is only for the period from August to December, and only for the first 3 years. All apples otherwise are duty-free without quota restriction. And so we and MPI can provide, further detailed information on those, but essentially the quota administration is as simple and clean as possible without any complexity at the importer end.
Great, thank you. Next question is for Jamie. After entry into force, who should I talk to if my goods are not clearing customs within the stipulated timeframes?
Well, as an official from New Zealand Customs, I'd say that would never happen. But if we move aside from that, in the first instance, if you're using a customs broker to clear your imports and your goods, then they would be your first port of call. Otherwise, if you're not using a broker or your answer is not satisfactory, next option is the importing customs, and we will be setting up contact points for traders to be able to access information from the importing customs. And if you're still not satisfied with the answer you get, if you contact the exporting customs, there is provisions in the FTA for customs to customs discussions and consultations to identify and address situations such as those.
Great, thank you. So next question for David. I am unsure of my HS code and related tariff advantage. How and when can I get an advance ruling and from who?
So I might leave Jamie to comment on advanced rulings. That's his area. But what I'll say is the tariff finder is a useful tool for if you enter in your export products such as honey, you just type the word honey into the tariff finder and it will provide you with a range of possible tariff lines and the tariff treatment and rules of origin as well. So just a plug for that. And the easy way to do that, to find the tariff finder, is just by searching for tariff finder New Zealand. It's always the top search result. And we think it's a really useful tool. But Jamie, on the specific question, maybe you might help out there.
Yeah, well, I'll also put in a plug for the Tariff Finder, which is a very comprehensive and easy to use tool. All you have to do is enter in one word that relates to your good and you'll get a range of outcomes across different FTAs and all the information you need. So that is an outstanding tool that I'd recommend. In regard to advanced rulings, the FTA provides for an advance ruling on classification or origin of goods to be issued within 90 days of all necessary information being provided to the customs authorities. They are binding rulings. At this stage, we do not have, as appears in some recent New Zealand FTAs, valuation rulings, but we are looking for those in the future.
Great, thank you. Next question is for Robert. Can you provide some examples of environmentally friendly goods and how were these selected?
Sure, thanks for the question. As Greg mentioned, we've got a list of 293 environmental goods. We thought we had 300, but at Legal Scrub, we found we duplicated some, so it's a pity we didn't hit that number. But the complete list will be in the agreement when it's published, so you'll be able to see exactly what the goods are. Some goods which come to mind, you have your usual suspects. You have solar panels, power generators, hydro generators, equipment for measuring temperature. But some of the goods that I think are of real interest for New Zealand, and which we are glad we got on the list, include 5 different wood products, so non-Indigenous tree wood products, of course. So that's something New Zealand's always tried to get in environmental lists, and it's always been resisted, but the UK was happy to accept it, so that's really significant for New Zealand. A couple of other significant products for New Zealand are flax. We had flax included as an environmental good. And we also had wool. So wool from sheep is included as an environmental good. So things that are sort of land related. In terms of deriving the list, we tried taking a scientific approach where we had all sorts of criteria involved in assessing whether a good could be classed as environmental or not. And that approach just wasn't working for the UK or New Zealand. So what we eventually ended up doing is just taking a common sense approach to the goods. So New Zealand presented a list of goods that we thought were environmentally friendly. The UK did the same. And both sides went through those goods and we said, oh, that's not really an environmental good. This is New Zealand looking at the UK list and the UK looking at the New Zealand list. And we basically derived the list that way. So it was more a common sense approach. You call it a sniff test, I guess. I mean, a lot of these goods are obviously environmentally friendly. Some of the goods listed obviously weren't. So that's how we derived the list.
Excellent. Glad to hear that Wool's getting a bit of a free pass because it was such a great product and it needs to get back up where it used to be. Okay, next one for Greg. I understand there's not a set time frame for this to come into play. However, is it likely to happen this calendar year?
Thanks, Catherine. A good and difficult question to answer. I mean, as I mentioned, we on the New Zealand side are determined to do all we can to be ready for entry into force this year. It's something that we've been focused on from the start, that we have discussed a lot with the UK as well. Certainly, both sides are determined to get it into force as quickly as possible. But as I mentioned, because this involves parliamentary processes, it's just not possible for us as officials to have exact timeframes on it. We're progressing pretty well on our side. The UK is moving forward as well. They have their own approach to ratification and implementation. And we are working closely with them. But we will certainly let everyone know as soon as we can when we have a better sense of when the entry into force date will be. It will be as soon as we can do it. And our intention is that it's this year, and we've been very clear with the UK on that too. And the other aspect I think that's important for New Zealand is that we are kind of keeping pace in the UK ratification processes with Australia, so that we are our FTAs are entering into force at the same time. That's really important, I think, from the competitiveness perspective. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Next one for Jamie. Is there a criteria for issuing exports?
By export, we don't have an export certificate component in there. We do have an origin declaration requirement. And we have tried to make that as accessible for traders as possible. The origin declaration can be completed by either a producer or exporter of a good. And we've also introduced the concept of importer's knowledge, which allows an importer, based on the information they hold, to also verify the origin of the goods. So we've enabled that to be as accessible for the trading population as possible. One question we have been raised is there an example or guideline or template that traders could use for the origin documentation? At this stage, there is not, but as the negotiations grew to a close, this was something that officials identified that would be beneficial, and we've put that on the work program to do for the Rules of Origin working group to complete as soon as possible after entry into force. So it's open, it's accessible. There is a guideline coming, but it's not available yet.
Thank you. It was suggested to me that someone knows more about this stuff than I do. Maybe that question might have been about TRQ, and maybe David would have something to say about that.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, I heard export certificate and my ears pricked up. So export certificates is how New Zealand administers the quota access. So this is for beef, sheep meat, butter, cheese, and fresh apples. And so during the transition period before tariffs are eliminated for those products, exporters who wish to export to the UK will need an export certificate to be able to access those quotas. As I said, those are apportioned for dairy products in accordance with the DERA, the Dairy Restructuring Act. And that's on the basis of milk solids collected. And then for beef and sheep meat, they're administered by the meat board. And those procedures will be well known to the meat and the dairy industries. They operate as they do for other FTA quotas, or for the WTO as well. So any questions about those we can help with, and you can also contact the meat board on meat specific questions. But there shouldn't be any surprises. It operates as it does for other quota access allocations. Thanks.
Great, thanks, David. Now, Prakash, you're not going to get off scot-free. I've got a question for you here. Who will be in charge of setting up and operating the 3-year seasonal quota for apples?
Yes, it's in the bill, which is set out for New Zealand Apple and Pears Incorporated, which is the industry good body for Apple. So they will be administering the quota for that 3-year period.
Great, thank you. Next one's for Rose. There was a side letter on wine alongside the FTA. What additional benefits does this provide New Zealand?
Sure thing, good question. So one of the key benefits of the Wine and Distilled Spirits Annex is a comprehensive list of winemaking practices that New Zealand exporters to the UK will be able to use on their wine. So it's all sorts of physical processes and that kind of thing. What the side letter does is sets out a process for a remaining few, I think it's 5, winemaking practices to be assessed through the UK system with the aim of adding them to that list. So the added benefit is that ideally we will have a few more winemaking practices to finish off that list. Thanks.
Excellent. Next one for Jamie. Was the secure export scheme rolled up in the FTA, and is there a time frame for when it could be used for the UK?
There is a provision in the agreement for authorised exporter schemes, but outside of the UK, this already exists. If you're an SES member, we have just signed a mutual recognition arrangement with the UK, and so therefore you should be able to start being able to access benefits of lower interventions and others when importing into the UK in the very near future.
Excellent. And you're just very popular today, I'm afraid. But so customs procedures, what does a single window system mean for customs procedures, and when will it be live?
So a single window system, generally speaking, is a means to ensure that all government compliance requirements are met through the one data port. So a trader who's either importing or exporting inserts their data one time into the system, and then it's distributed out to the various agencies for them to do their parts in the compliance exercise, and then the trader gets a report back through the system. The benefits of a single window are basically simplification. Is probably the easiest one. There's also increased efficiency through only having to enter data once, and for the agencies to then go away and do all their bits and pieces. And also through that, the reduced duplication means there's also a reduction in the possibility of errors or discrepancies between documents. New Zealand has a single window in place, the JBMS, Joint Border Management System, which has been operating successfully for a couple of years and returning benefits to our trading population. And the UK is currently in the job of developing a system, and they expect that to be operational in the next couple of years. These are not simple or easy systems, because you need to be able to collect data from a range of sources and then amalgamate and distribute, and then out to agencies, and then amalgamate and get answers back. So it will not be a simple and easy process. It certainly wasn't for New Zealand Customs, so I can't imagine it will UK, but they have undertaken to have that system in place in the next couple of years.
Great, thank you. I mean, the UK's got a really big job ahead of it, really, with the whole Brexit situation as well. So I'm sure that they're, wanting to work hard with their export community to try to take away some of the pain and friction that they probably haven't been used to. Okay, next one's for Robert. How does the FTA impose does the FTA impose binding environmental requirements on business?
Thanks for the question. It's an interesting one. The short answer is no, but I would nuance that in a number of ways. The reason it's no is because there's a right to regulate article in the agreement, which means that both sides were very cautious about having legislative requirements imposed on either side when it came to private business. So it does. What that means is that it's up to each side to impose environmental requirements as they see fit on their individual enterprises in their countries. But the other thing I would say is that the agreement does have a corporate social responsibility article. So both sides are bound to encourage private enterprise to be socially responsible when it comes to protecting the environment. And that includes looking at their supply chains and, to the extent possible, ensuring that products that they're sourcing are produced in an environmentally responsible manner. So that is one obligation sitting on both sides, although I would say the obligation is only to encourage businesses to do that. The other thing I would say is that there's a voluntary mechanisms article in the agreement. So many companies set up their own systems where they will grade themselves on how environmentally friendly their products are. So the issue there can be that you've got the company itself deciding how environmentally friendly it is. So in this article, both sides have that we need to ensure that companies, when they do that, they're doing it based on scientific research and rational approaches to how they grade themselves on how environmentally friendly their products are. Because New Zealand's run into situations before where companies overseas are claiming that New Zealand products aren't produced environmentally friendly, and theirs are far superior, which is just plain wrong if you look at the research. So we've attempted to address that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a whole brave new world, isn't it? And I think the EU particularly seems to be setting very high environmental bars for goods that are being imported. And, even pre the FTA, we've been hearing from exporters about, packaging requirements and things like that. So, yeah, it's definitely an area to watch. Next one is for David. How are outcomes on beef and sheep affected by the WTO tariff rate quota dispute?
So thanks for that question. So the first comment I'll make is that the FTA outcomes are additional to the access that New Zealand already has into the UK through the WTO. So there are two channels for access. One is through the WTO quota and the other is through the new FTA quotas. The second point is in relation to the UK's exit from the EU. The question refers to the dispute that we had about how the EU and the UK calculated the appropriate split for those quotas, and essentially sliced them in half, which did reduce flexibility for exporters to export to the two markets. What we can say is the UK FTA delivers tariff elimination over the 15-year timeframes for beef and 11 years for beef plus a 5-year safeguard, and then 15 years for sheep meat. And so that restores, full or actually goes beyond that flexibility that existed prior, and allows for full tariff elimination without any quota limits. So we can look at the UK outcome as providing a much greater access than existed prior to Brexit. And then separately with the EU FTA, there are some improvements on beef, sheep meat, and dairy access into the EU market. They do fall short of what we secured with the UK, but I'd say taken together, looking at the outcomes in both FTAs, there's much better flexibility for exporters to export to both of those markets than existed before the FTA outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Look, keep the questions coming. We've got 10 or 15 minutes left. And if you don't ask more questions, you'll get a bit more of your day back, I guess. But I've got, I guess, one. I'm not sure who to direct it to. Maybe it's Greg. So we did get contacted by a manufacturing jeweler who exports to Australia. And their question, I guess, was around, does that mean, I think maybe there's currently, like they said, a 12% tariff on imported jewellery. So, of course, they're trying to figure out what does this FTA mean for us. It means that if the tariffs in New Zealand, they go down to 0 too, presumably.
David, you probably can't tell, but I'm looking at you as I'm answering this. From what I recall of the goods outcomes, New Zealand's tariffs that are on the UK products at the moment are eliminated from entry into force, right? Across the board.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. So if there are tariffs on those products from the UK now, they will be removed when the FTA enters into force.
Great. And I guess because this company's exporting into Australia, Australia's doing FTA with the UK as well. That's not quite completed yet, is it?
So Australia has concluded signed their FTA. They did it a little bit before us, and the UK is kind of moving forward with the ratification of those at the moment, both FTA and Australia's.
Right. So it'll be the same in both countries for that exporter. If they're like Australia and New Zealand will be the same with regard to dropping tariffs for imported jewellery.
So they'll need to have a look and see what Australia's done with its tariffs under the FTA to the UK, which is probably different to what we've done. But I don't know what Australia did.
Sure. Jamie.
So if I can intervene there, one of the unique things that we have in the UK FTA that is a very forward-looking provision under the accumulation is the ability to look at extending the ambit of the FTA to third parties where both New Zealand and the UK have an FTA with that party. So forward-looking, there is potential for some sort of triangulation or diagonalisation, if there is such a word, between New Zealand, Australia and the UK. It would be a bit of an adventure to work through because we've never done it before, but there is provision in there for such an activity in the future.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I've got another one coming through here for Greg. How does this FTA relate to the UK's CPTPP accession?
Thanks, Catherine. In fact, we are about to head off in the next few days to Japan for a round of negotiations with the other CPTPP parties on the UK's accession to CPTPP. And I mean, I think it's really, it was an important aspect of the UK's process towards joining CPTPP to have FTAs with New Zealand and Australia, and we've said that it's an important stepping stone for them, which it is. They are separate processes though, so we are kind of joining in with the other CPTPP parties and engaging with on what what the conditions are for their accession, and making sure that they kind of can meet those high standards in CPTPP, both in market access and also meeting all the high standard rules in CPTPP. But I think you can see from the high quality in the FTA that we have with the UK on both the rule side and the market access side is a really good demonstration of the UK's ability to meet those kinds of standards.
Great, thank you. Right, this one's for David. Is it correct that New Zealand will not be better off from the new agreement on sheep meats, as it doesn't kick in till 90% of the WTO current quota is complete, which will mean value-added sheep meats, i.e. meat products and preparations, will be subject to duties?
Thanks for that question. Yes, it's true that the quota coverage of the FTA outcome for sheep meat doesn't match entirely to the WTO quota coverage. So there are some tariff lines covered by the quota in the New Zealand UK FTA, which are not subject to the WTO quota. So for those tariff lines, which are not highly traded, the FTA outcome won't be available until the WTO quota is 90% filled. That was a condition the UK insisted on, that the FTA quotas only kick in once 90% of the WTO quota is filled. And that's a sort of an unfortunate consequence of the fact that the tariff lines don't match entirely. It was something we sought to ameliorate in the negotiations, but we're not able to budge the UK on. So yes, the questioner is right. For those few tariff lines, the FTA outcomes will not be available until that 90% trigger is hit. Until that point, there will still be an ability to trade at the WTO tariffs into the UK, but not at the preferential rate. Thanks for the question.
Great, thank you. Yeah, last question, I think, before we wrap up. So this one's for Robert or David. You mentioned environmental requirements. Thinking about the fishing industry, is there imminent change of packaging we need to make? So that's one question. And then second, mussels tariff 8%, 4 equal reductions in 3 years will mean 2.6 each year, question mark. Other fish also 0%, question mark. So the first one was about packaging.
Go ahead, David.
I might leave the packaging question to you, Robert, but look, my understanding is no, there aren't any packaging requirements for environmental reasons imposed by the UK FTA outcome. But Robert, correct me if I'm wrong. And then on the mussels outcome, so there are a few lines that phase to zero over 4 or 8 years. As Greg mentioned in his introduction, this is about 2% of tariff lines. Covers about $8 to $9 million of imports from New Zealand into the UK per year, and mussels is the largest component of that, close to 7 million. So for mussels, the tariff will be eliminated in 4 equal cuts. So the first cut will be on entry into force, and then the next cut will be on the 1st of January following that, and then subsequent cuts 1 year afterwards. And so yes, that's how the tariffs will be eliminated. And there are some other fish products and processed fish products, prepared fish, etc., as well as some frozen crustacean trade that will be subject to elimination over 4 years as well, following the same format. So the trade levels for those products currently are very low, but there may be trading opportunities as those tariffs reduce.
Yeah, and just thanks for that, David. And just to add that packaging isn't addressed directly in the environment chapter. In the environment chapter, we focused on sustainably managing our fisheries and on eliminating fisheries subsidies.
Great. One last quick one, and that is, it's my first time using the Tariff Finder website. This is David. When selecting importing, exporting, is it to from NZ or to from the country selected in the drop-down list underneath?
Okay, sorry if that's not clear. So if you're exporting a product from New Zealand, you select exporting. If you're importing a product into New Zealand, you select importing.
Great, love that clarity. Okay, so just lastly, Greg, webinars are great, but are you planning in-person engagements?
Webinars are great, and it's been a really great chance to reach a lot of people easily today. Still a lot of you there, which is really good. But yeah, absolutely. We so as I mentioned at the start, we're kind of working our way towards that entry into force to make sure we and all of you are ready as possible to take advantage of the FTA outcomes. So we'll kind of build on these technical webinars that we're doing now with some in-person events. We are planning around the country September, October-ish, I hope. I hope you don't mind me saying that. That's the intention, assuming that COVID conditions allow that, so that we can get out and hear directly from you and talk directly with you about the outcomes. And we're really open to do more. If you want to let us know the specific things that you're interested in, if there is an interest in a particular sector or a particular region for something, just let us know. And we're looking around the panel too. We're really happy to get ourselves together and come out and see you.
Great. Excellent. I'm sure the Export New Zealand Network will be more than happy to work with you on that. So look, just a big thanks to all the officials for all the work that they've put into this. It's really a high quality outcome and is going to be fantastic for New Zealand going forward. So we do appreciate all the hard work people did. And your willingness to get out and talk about it. Thank you all who attended. We can't see you. It's a bit weird, but thanks for being there. And hopefully you got some good value out of the webinar. Thank you.